Before dawn on the 27th of May 2015, Swiss police moved through a luxury Zurich hotel. The world of football governance would never look the same again. 7 senior football officials were arrested at the Hotel Bauer au Lac in Zurich. Swiss authorities acted on a request from the United States Department of Justice. The arrests coincided with a scheduled FIFA Congress in Zurich. Officials had gathered for what was expected to be a routine governance meeting. News cameras captured officials being escorted from the hotel. Images of the arrests broadcast instantly across global television networks and social media. The U.S. Department of Justice unsealed indictments charging 14 individuals with racketeering, wire fraud, and money laundering conspiracies. Football governance faced an unprecedented legal reckoning. The indictments alleged corruption spanning more than 2 decades within international football. The U.S. Department of Justice described a systemic pattern of alleged bribery and fraud. FIFA, the Fédération Internationale de Football Association, governs world football from its headquarters in Zurich. It oversees competitions involving hundreds of member associations worldwide. The investigation was led by the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. Swiss authorities cooperated closely throughout the process. The Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn served as the primary jurisdiction for the U.S. prosecutions. Federal prosecutors there had been building the case for several years. Attorney General Loretta Lynch announced the charges publicly on the 27th of May 2015. She described the alleged conduct as corruption that had infected football for decades, according to DOJ records. The indictment named officials from CONCACAF, CONMEBOL, and other football confederations. The alleged schemes involved media rights contracts and marketing agreements across multiple continents. CONCACAF is the Confederation of North, Central America, and Caribbean Association Football. CONMEBOL governs South American football. Both organizations featured prominently in the indictments. The alleged schemes described in charging documents involved payments totaling hundreds of millions of dollars. These were alleged to be bribes paid in exchange for media and marketing rights. Swiss authorities simultaneously conducted separate investigations into the awarding of the 2018 and 2022 FIFA World Cups. These were distinct proceedings from the U.S. federal case. The Swiss Office of the Attorney General searched FIFA headquarters in Zurich on the 27th of May 2015. Swiss investigators seized electronic data and documents from the organization. FIFA President Sepp Blatter was not among those arrested in the initial Zurich operation. He had been re-elected as FIFA president just days before the arrests occurred. Blatter announced his resignation as FIFA president on the 2nd of June 2015, just days after the arrests. He stated he would remain in office until a successor was elected, per FIFA records. The resignation of a long-serving FIFA president under such circumstances was without modern precedent. Blatter had led FIFA since 1998, overseeing significant commercial expansion of the organization. Swiss authorities later opened a criminal investigation into Blatter himself in September 2015. This investigation concerned a payment made to UEFA President Michel Platini, according to Swiss records. FIFA's Ethics Committee suspended both Blatter and Platini in October 2015 pending investigations. The suspensions were later extended and ultimately resulted in bans from football activities. The FIFA Ethics Committee Adjudicatory Chamber banned Blatter from all football activities for 8 years in December 2015. This was later reduced to 6 years on appeal. Michel Platini received an 8-year ban from football activities from the FIFA Ethics Committee in December 2015. His ban was also subsequently reduced on appeal to 4 years. Platini had been widely considered a frontrunner to succeed Blatter as FIFA president. The ethics proceedings effectively ended his candidacy for the FIFA presidency. The Court of Arbitration for Sport later reduced Platini's ban to 4 years in May 2016. Platini consistently denied wrongdoing throughout the proceedings. The scale of the U.S. indictments was remarkable. Charging documents described alleged corrupt schemes involving football officials, sports marketing companies, and media rights across multiple continents. The investigation reached into Central America, South America, the Caribbean, and beyond. Alleged corrupt payments were described as flowing through U.S. financial institutions, establishing federal jurisdiction. The use of U.S. dollar transactions and American banks was central to establishing U.S. jurisdiction. Federal prosecutors argued this gave them legal authority to pursue the case internationally. The case drew comparisons to major organized crime prosecutions in U.S. legal history. Prosecutors applied the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, known as RICO, to the charges. RICO statutes allow prosecutors to charge individuals as part of a criminal enterprise. Their application to international sports governance was legally significant and widely discussed by legal scholars. The investigation had been years in the making before the 2015 arrests. Court documents indicated that cooperating witnesses had been working with U.S. authorities for an extended period. Chuck Blazer, a former CONCACAF General Secretary, had pleaded guilty to multiple charges in 2013. His cooperation with U.S. authorities was a significant element of the broader investigation. Blazer's guilty plea was not made public until 2015. Court documents revealed he had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators as part of his plea agreement. The global football community reacted with shock and disbelief to the Zurich arrests. National football associations, sponsors, and broadcasters all faced questions about their relationships with FIFA. Major corporate sponsors of FIFA publicly expressed concern following the arrests. Several sponsors called for reform and transparency within the organization's governance structures. The 2015 FIFA crisis prompted urgent calls for governance reform from within and outside the organization. The scale of the alleged corruption described in the indictments demanded institutional response. To understand how U.S. investigators reached football officials, one must examine the commercial machinery of international football. Media rights and marketing contracts were at the heart of the alleged schemes. The rights to broadcast major football tournaments are enormously valuable commercial properties. Indictments alleged that the process of awarding these rights was corrupted by bribery. Sports marketing companies acted as intermediaries between football confederations and broadcasters. Charging documents alleged that some of these companies participated in corrupt payment schemes. The Copa America, the Gold Cup, and other major tournaments were referenced in the charging documents. These competitions generate substantial broadcasting and sponsorship revenues. Alleged corrupt payments were described as flowing through shell companies and bank accounts in multiple countries. U.S. dollar transactions through American banks established federal jurisdiction. The indictments described alleged bribery schemes stretching back to the 1990s. This suggested the alleged corruption had persisted across multiple leadership regimes within football confederations. The involvement of sports marketing firms was a distinctive feature of the alleged schemes. These companies held rights contracts and were alleged to have paid bribes to secure and retain them. Traffic Sports, a sports marketing company, was named in the indictments. The company and its executives faced charges related to alleged corrupt payments in connection with football rights. The alleged schemes described in charging documents involved tournaments across North America, South America, and the Caribbean. The geographic scope underscored the international reach of the investigation. Wire fraud charges were central to the U.S. prosecution strategy. Prosecutors alleged that electronic communications and financial transfers through U.S. systems constituted federal crimes. Money laundering charges accompanied the fraud and racketeering allegations. Prosecutors alleged that proceeds of the alleged bribery schemes were moved through financial systems to conceal their origin. The investigation required extensive international legal cooperation. The U.S. Department of Justice worked with Swiss authorities and other national law enforcement agencies throughout the process. Mutual legal assistance treaties between countries facilitated the sharing of evidence and information. These international legal frameworks were essential to the cross-border investigation. The complexity of the alleged financial schemes required forensic accounting expertise. Investigators traced alleged payments through multiple jurisdictions and corporate structures. The breadth of the alleged schemes, spanning decades and continents, made this one of the most complex sports corruption investigations in legal history. The evidence gathering had taken years. The initial indictment unsealed in May 2015 named 14 defendants. A superseding indictment filed in December 2015 expanded the charges and named additional defendants. Jeffrey Webb, then CONCACAF president, was among those arrested in Zurich in May 2015. He was extradited to the United States and later pleaded guilty to multiple charges. Jack Warner, a former CONCACAF president and FIFA vice president, was charged in the indictments. Warner, based in Trinidad and Tobago, contested extradition to the United States. Warner consistently denied the allegations against him. As of the time of documentary production, extradition proceedings involving Warner remained ongoing in Trinidad and Tobago courts. Eugenio Figueiredo, a former FIFA vice president and CONMEBOL president, was arrested in Zurich. He was later extradited to Uruguay, where he faced separate legal proceedings. Eduardo Lee, then Costa Rica Football Federation president, was arrested in Zurich. He was subsequently extradited to the United States and later pleaded guilty to charges. Julio Rocha, a former Nicaragua Football Federation president, was also charged. He later pleaded guilty to charges in the U.S. federal proceedings. Costas Takas, a former CONCACAF official, was arrested in Zurich. He subsequently pleaded guilty to charges in the U.S. federal case. Rafael Esquivel, then Venezuela Football Federation president, was arrested in Zurich. He was later extradited to the United States and pleaded guilty to charges. José Maria Marin, a former Brazil Football Confederation president, was arrested in Zurich. He was extradited to the United States and stood trial in federal court in Brooklyn. Juan Angel Napout, then CONMEBOL president, was arrested in a second Zurich operation in December 2015. He was extradited to the United States and stood trial alongside Marin. Manuel Berger, a former Peru Football Federation president, was charged in the indictments. He stood trial in the United States and was acquitted by a jury in December 2017. The acquittal of Manuel Berger was a significant moment in the proceedings. It demonstrated that the legal process included meaningful scrutiny of the evidence presented by prosecutors. José Maria Marin was convicted by a jury in December 2017 on multiple counts. Juan Angel Napout was also convicted on multiple counts in the same trial. Marin was sentenced to 4 years in prison in August 2018. Napout was sentenced to 9 years in prison in July 2018, according to U.S. Department of Justice records. Multiple defendants entered guilty pleas in the U.S. federal proceedings. Guilty pleas often involved cooperation agreements with federal prosecutors, according to court records. Alejandro Berzaco, a sports marketing executive, pleaded guilty and cooperated with U.S. authorities. His testimony was significant in the federal proceedings, according to court records. Hugo and Mariano Jinkis, executives of Full Play Group, a sports marketing company, were charged. They reached plea agreements with U.S. prosecutors, according to court records. Aaron Davidson, a former Traffic Sports executive, pleaded guilty to charges in the U.S. proceedings. His cooperation contributed to the broader federal investigation. Jose Hawilla, founder of Traffic Sports, pleaded guilty to multiple charges. He agreed to forfeit a substantial sum and cooperated with U.S. federal investigators. The cooperation of sports marketing executives provided investigators with detailed accounts of alleged payment schemes. Their testimony was central to the prosecution's case in multiple proceedings. Nicolas Leos, a former CONMEBOL president, was charged in the indictments. He died in Paraguay in 2019 before extradition proceedings were resolved, according to published reports. Ricardo Teixeira, a former Brazil Football Confederation president, was charged in the superseding indictment. He remained in Brazil, and extradition proceedings were ongoing. Marco Polo Del Nero, a former Brazil Football Confederation president, was also charged. He resigned from the FIFA Council in 2015 and faced proceedings in Brazil. The FIFA Ethics Committee imposed bans on multiple officials during and after the investigation. These sanctions were separate from the U.S. criminal proceedings but related to the same alleged conduct. The FIFA Ethics Committee banned Jeffrey Webb from all football activities for life in 2020. Webb had previously pleaded guilty in the U.S. federal proceedings. The FIFA Ethics Committee also imposed bans on Jack Warner. Warner's bans from football activities were imposed in his absence, as extradition proceedings remained unresolved. The FIFA Ethics Committee banned Eduardo Lee from football activities for 8 years. Lee had pleaded guilty in the U.S. federal proceedings prior to the ethics sanction. The FIFA Ethics Committee banned Rafael Esquivel from football activities for life. Esquivel had pleaded guilty in the U.S. federal proceedings. The FIFA Ethics Committee banned Julio Rocha from football activities for life. Rocha had pleaded guilty in the U.S. federal proceedings prior to the ethics sanction. The FIFA Ethics Committee banned Eugenio Figueiredo from football activities for life. Figueiredo faced separate legal proceedings in Uruguay following his extradition from Switzerland. The FIFA Ethics Committee banned Juan Angel Napout from football activities for life. Napout had been convicted in the U.S. federal trial in December 2017. The FIFA Ethics Committee banned Jose Maria Murin from football activities for life. Murin had been convicted in the U.S. federal trial in December 2017. The scale of ethics sanctions imposed by FIFA was unprecedented in the organization's history. Multiple senior officials from across the football world faced permanent bans from the sport. The Swiss criminal investigation into the awarding of the 2018 and 2022 World Cups proceeded separately. Swiss authorities examined the decision-making processes that led to those tournament awards. Russia was awarded the 2018 FIFA World Cup and Qatar the 2022 FIFA World Cup in December 2010. The Swiss investigation examined the voting process for those awards. The Swiss investigation into the World Cup awards was a lengthy process. Swiss authorities ultimately closed the investigation without charges in 2020, citing insufficient evidence. The closure of the Swiss World Cup investigation was significant. It meant no criminal charges were brought in Switzerland specifically related to the 2018 and 2022 World Cup voting decisions. The election of Gianni Infantino as FIFA president in February 2016 marked a new chapter for the organization. Infantino defeated other candidates in a special election following Blatter's resignation. Infantino had previously served as UEFA General Secretary. His election was seen as an opportunity for FIFA to begin a process of governance reform and institutional rebuilding. FIFA adopted a new governance framework in 2016. The reforms included measures aimed at increasing transparency, strengthening the independence of oversight bodies, and improving financial controls. The FIFA Council replaced the FIFA Executive Committee as the main decision-making body. The restructuring was intended to improve accountability within the organization's governance structure. Term limits and enhanced disclosure requirements were introduced for FIFA officials. These measures were part of the broader governance reform package adopted by the FIFA Congress. The FIFA Audit and Compliance Committee was strengthened as part of the reforms. Independent oversight of FIFA's financial affairs was identified as a priority in the reform agenda. CONCACAF also undertook governance reforms following the crisis. The Confederation commissioned independent reviews and implemented new compliance and transparency measures. CONMEBOL similarly undertook governance reforms in the aftermath of the crisis. New leadership and compliance frameworks were introduced across South American football governance. The U.S. federal proceedings continued for several years after the initial 2015 arrests. New charges, plea agreements, and sentencing hearings extended the legal process well into the 2020s. Sepp Blatter faced a criminal trial in Switzerland. Swiss prosecutors charged him in connection with a payment made to Michel Platini, according to Swiss court records. Blatter was acquitted by a Swiss court in July 2023. The court found that the prosecution had not proven its case beyond the required legal standard, according to Swiss court records. The acquittal of Blatter in Switzerland was a significant legal development. It was distinct from the FIFA Ethics Committee sanctions, which remained in place as separate administrative proceedings. Michel Platini was also acquitted in the same Swiss criminal proceedings in July 2023. Both men had consistently denied criminal wrongdoing throughout the lengthy legal process. The Swiss acquittals did not affect the FIFA Ethics Committee bans, which were administrative rather than criminal sanctions. The two processes operated under different legal standards. The Court of Arbitration for Sport heard multiple appeals arising from FIFA Ethics Committee decisions. CAS rulings modified some sanctions while upholding others in various cases. The CAS is an independent international arbitration body for sports disputes. Its decisions on FIFA ethics cases carried significant legal weight within the international sports governance framework. Chuck Blazer died in July 2017 before he could be sentenced in the U.S. federal proceedings. His cooperation with investigators had been a foundational element of the broader case. The sentencing of convicted defendants in the U.S. federal case took place over several years. Sentences ranged from probation to multiple years of imprisonment, depending on individual circumstances. Jeffrey Webb was sentenced to probation in 2020 after pleading guilty. The sentencing judge considered multiple factors including his cooperation with federal authorities. The U.S. federal proceedings resulted in convictions and guilty pleas from a significant number of defendants. The Department of Justice described the outcomes as a major law enforcement achievement. Some defendants fought extradition from their home countries for extended periods. The international legal processes involved in extradition added complexity and length to the overall proceedings. The investigation also examined the conduct of football officials in relation to the Copa America Centenario, held in the United States in 2016. This tournament featured in charging documents. The Copa Libertadores, South America's premier club football competition, was also referenced in the charging documents. Alleged corrupt payments related to broadcasting rights for this competition were described. The World Cup qualifying competitions in CONMEBOL and CONCACAF regions were also referenced in the indictments. Alleged corrupt payments related to broadcasting rights for these competitions were described. The investigation highlighted the commercial value of football broadcasting rights across the Americas. The alleged corruption described in charging documents centered on the monetization of these rights. The role of financial institutions in the alleged schemes was examined by investigators. Prosecutors alleged that U.S. banks were used to process payments that formed part of the alleged corrupt schemes. The investigation prompted reviews of anti-money laundering compliance within financial institutions. Regulators examined whether banks had adequate controls to detect suspicious transactions. The case raised broader questions about governance standards in international sports organizations. Legal scholars and governance experts examined the implications for other global sporting bodies. The FIFA case prompted discussions about the adequacy of existing legal frameworks for regulating international sports governance. Calls for new international legal instruments were heard in various forums. The case also prompted reflection within the football journalism community. Investigative reporters who had long reported on FIFA governance issues saw their work validated by the legal proceedings. Academic researchers began examining the FIFA case as a study in institutional corruption and governance failure. The case generated substantial scholarly literature on sports governance and accountability. The FIFA case became a reference point in discussions about the governance of international non-governmental organizations. It demonstrated the potential reach of national legal systems into global institutions. The 2015 Zurich arrests marked a watershed moment in the history of international sports governance. The event of that May morning set in motion years of legal proceedings and institutional reform. The U.S. Department of Justice prosecutions resulted in numerous guilty pleas and several convictions at trial. The legal process demonstrated the reach of U.S. federal law into international sports governance. The FIFA Ethics Committee imposed unprecedented sanctions on senior football officials. These administrative proceedings ran parallel to but separately from the criminal legal processes. The Swiss criminal proceedings resulted in acquittals for Blatter and Platini in 2023. These outcomes underscored the distinction between criminal prosecution standards and administrative ethics proceedings. FIFA adopted significant governance reforms in the years following the crisis. Whether those reforms have fundamentally changed the organization's culture remains a subject of ongoing scrutiny and debate. CONCACAF and CONMEBOL both undertook governance reforms following the crisis. New compliance frameworks and leadership structures were introduced across both confederations. The case demonstrated that international sports organizations are not beyond the reach of national legal systems. The use of U.S. financial systems established jurisdiction that prosecutors used effectively. The role of cooperating witnesses was central to the U.S. federal prosecution strategy. Their testimony and cooperation provided investigators with detailed accounts of alleged payment schemes. The case highlighted the importance of financial transparency in international sports governance. Alleged corrupt schemes were described as relying on opacity in financial transactions and corporate structures. The football fans who fill stadiums around the world were largely uninvolved in the alleged schemes. The sport itself continued to be played and celebrated throughout the legal proceedings. The players who compete on football pitches worldwide were not implicated in the governance allegations. The integrity of competition on the pitch was separate from the alleged off-field corruption. The case raised enduring questions about how international sports organizations should be governed and regulated. These questions remain relevant to global sports governance discussions today. The media coverage of the FIFA case was extensive and global. Journalists from dozens of countries reported on the arrests, charges, trials, and institutional consequences over many years. The case prompted reflection on the responsibilities of corporate sponsors of international football. Questions were raised about due diligence and the obligations of commercial partners of sports organizations. The broadcasting industry also faced questions about its role in the commercial ecosystem of international football. Rights holders and broadcasters examined their relationships with football confederations. The legal proceedings generated an extensive public record of alleged conduct within international football governance. Court documents, plea agreements, and judgments form a detailed historical archive. The FIFA case will be studied by governance scholars, legal practitioners, and sports administrators for many years. It represents a defining episode in the history of international sports governance. The football pitch itself endures as the heart of the sport. Millions of players and fans around the world continue to find meaning and joy in the game, regardless of governance controversies. The event of the 27th of May, 2015 in Zurich changed the landscape of international sports governance permanently. The legal and institutional consequences continue to unfold years after that dramatic morning. Football remains the world's most popular sport, watched and played by billions. The governance crisis of 2015 was a chapter in its history, not the definition of the sport itself.